Steve Pheterson in here? Can you raise a hand? So I think Leon once said, best damn attorney in town. I think.
And Leon would know.
Yeah. So Steve's an expert on closing transactions for real estate investors. He works with a lot of real estate investors in the room here. So he's here to answer Q&As in terms of not evictions.
Oh, I could talk a little bit about evictions. I just don't do them.
Yeah.
They're just hellish. But
Steve does a ton of transactions in the Rochester market. So talking about transactions in the market, deal structures. Should I form an LLC? If I'm looking to partner, how should I structure that? And that sort of thing.
Subject twos, double closings, assumable mortgages, all these fun things.
Yeah. So please join me in welcoming Steve Pheterson.
Thank you. Woo! So I didn't come with a real spiel because I was hoping for questions, but I guess no one actually wrote a question, so I wasn't given any.
I have a ton of questions. I'm the annoying kid at the front of the class.
We'll let you do that. So my firm closes literally thousands of deals a year. I know that some of you use Mike Lease. Michael, I've known since before he was born. I stood up in his parents' wedding. My nephew, Tim Sardone, works with us. Obviously, everybody knows Derek Spadarico. So between the four of us, we do literally hundreds, if not thousands, of transactions every year. And I don't think there's anything that we haven't seen. Shoot.
Okay, my first question is, when should I form an LLC if I'm looking to buy an investment property?
I would form the LLC at the same time as you have the first contract accepted. You can put the contract initially. Joe LaBarbera is agent for an LLC to be formed. And then I can form it once the contract is accepted. Unless you know for sure that this is what you're going to do. Form it, get it ready, be ready. But not everybody knows that this is what they're going to do until they get the first deal in their pocket. It takes me a couple of days to form an LLC. It takes me a week and a half to 10 days to have all of the paperwork done for an LLC. Most of the reason it takes that long is I have to wait for stuff from Albany. So it can happen really quickly.
So follow-up question to that, should I use LegalZoom to form my LLC?
People don't realize when you use LegalZoom, you get the same paperwork that I get from the people I hire in Albany to file the papers. You don't necessarily get the LLC book. You haven't done any member meetings. You don't have an operating agreement. You probably haven't done publication. You're going to get 35 letters saying I'm the person that you should hire for publication. So what I find is that people get LegalZoom. They think they've set up their LLC and they're all ready to go, and they in fact haven't done a thing.
Right. Well, Steve, you did my LLC, and one of the reasons that I felt good about that was if you make a mistake in your LLC, New York State can come to you and say your LLC isn't legal. So you don't have any of the protections. You're really operating as an individual person.
And the other part, which actually adds to that, is if you don't have if you get sued and they subpoena your records, they look at your LLC book. If you don't have an operating agreement, you're not a legal LLC. If you didn't do publication, you're probably not that's questionable, but I would argue you're not a proper LLC. If you don't have minutes of a meeting, who's the operating manager? Who's the secretary manager? All of those things give someone suing you the opportunity to say it's bullshit. There's no real LLC. They never followed through. They never used it. I want to be able to sue the person individually.
So let's say that you bought a property and lived in it and then moved down and now you rented it. What's the process for moving that property?
It's easy. Just all it takes is a few days and a few bucks. It's very easy.
And you do all of that work too?
Yes. Now the only question that comes up and it doesn't come up often, is if you bought the property in your individual name and we're putting it in your LLC, a bank could actually say that it's a violation of your mortgage. I have never seen it done, but what I've told clients is if that were to happen, bank is crazy. We would just put the deed back into your individual name to cure that problem.
If your rates are really low, would they have any incentive to call in the mortgage?
No, I've never seen. I have seen a mortgage called under circumstances like that one time, and it was before gay marriage was legal. And we did the equivalent of when my long-term client was dying, we put the house in her fiance's name, and the bank threatened to foreclose, and we were going to defend it, and instead I went out and got her a new mortgage. And then you could make the same argument for switching into an LLC. You can always deed it back, but I've never seen a bank go crazy because they've still got you individually and they've still got a mortgage against the property.
Thank you.
So if you do have a property already and you do want to put it under your LLC, how does that process start?
You call me, we find the old deed, get a copy of your LLC filing receipt, maybe a couple of other documents, make sure we're spelling the LLC name, and a few $100s later, it's recorded at the county clerk's office.
So say you did go through LegalZoom or some site and you want to make sure it's correct.
Well, LegalZoom is going to file your LLC properly.
Yeah.
They're just not going to do any of the stuff after the filing. They're going to send you a nice letter that says you need to do A through F. But nobody reads the letter. They just put the book away. I know that because nobody reads any of the stuff I give them after the closing. They just put the book away.
Yes. Oh, Joel Oliveira's got his hand up.
So I've had people come up to me and say to me, listen, I want to buy properties, and they go, I want to form an S corp instead of an LLC.
An S corp is from my perspective, an S corp gives you the exact same protection. Your accountant is going to tell you they want you to do an LLC. It's particularly for real estate. If you're buying a restaurant, we're going to do a corporation or a jewelry store. If I do a lot of hotels, I have a lot of Indian clients that buy and sell hotels, and the land is owned by an LLC, but the hotel is owned by a corporation. So, you know, it's just a matter of, for tax purposes, what's the better thing to do?
It says where to file under an S corp, right? What you saying?
And that's, from a tax standpoint, I don't think it makes a bit of difference at all. Nothing. In fact, when you're asked on the forms for your LLC how you're going to be taxed, your answer is probably going to be similar to an S corp.
There's one form that you file. It's an 8873, and you can declare yourself to be taxed as an S corporation, as an LLC, and everything works the same way.
Yep, I think that's what most people do.
So what do you see as the biggest mistake that newer investors make out there from a legal standpoint or a deal structure standpoint?
The biggest mistake I see every day, which I try to correct, is zoning. People put purchase offers in on 8 families, 6 families, 2 families. I call them up, did you check zoning? No, we didn't check zoning. Literally, when I get and realtors don't check zoning. Nobody checks zoning. How do you write a contract for $5 million without making sure the property actually has 54 apartments? But nobody does it. So literally, when I get a contract, the first thing I do before I even call the client is I email this person at the city, and she sends me a violations list. She tells me if there's any pending inspections coming up in the future, and whether or not there's any fines. A buyer may agree to be responsible for violations. You know, you may be buying the property as is, but even if you're buying the property as is and you're accepting the violations, you don't necessarily want to pay $3,000 in fines that you find out about after the closing. And it shocks me how many people actually check on zoning. And it's the first thing that we do. So I'll send my clients a list that I get from the city, and I say, "Are you sure you want to buy this property?" It's got 5 pages of violations. It looks like half the house burned to the ground. And Joe Labarbera will say yes.
Great, I'll get it cheaper. And by the way, you saved me on that too.
Well, it's good to know.
I remember because I was buying a five family, and then you checked, and it was actually a 4-family, illegal 5-family, and the numbers were only worked as a 5, so we were able to get out of it because you told us to put in there exactly how many units was specified to be.
I can't tell you how many contracts come that says it's multifamily. Well, what does that mean, multifamily? If you thought it was a 5-family, but the contract says it's a multifamily and it's only a 2-family, you just bought yourself a 2-family. So, you know, it really is, from my perspective, the most important thing I do, and it's right at the beginning of the process.
What about when somebody signs their LLC name instead of their personal name?
The realtors, is it DocuSign?
Yeah.
DocuSign has no freaking concept of how to have a contract signed. If the buyer's name is the Smith LLC, when it goes through DocuSign and the signature takes place, the signature comes through as the Smith LLC. You can change it, but nobody seems to know how to change it. So I get contracts all the time that are garbage. They're not really contracts because no one actually signed it. And realtors will argue with me. Of course it's signed. It says the Smith LLC. Whose signature is that? And that's another thing that happens literally every day. If I represent the person that signed Smith LLC, I don't necessarily raise it as an issue. But if the other party signed Smith LLC, I require that the contract be re-signed. And it's easy. At that point, I just have the buyer or the seller sign the copy next to Smith LLC. They sign Jim Smith. It's easy, but people get all wired and weird about it, that I'm questioning their prowess.
So that's signed by a member of the LLC, right?
Signed by a member of the LLC. I mean, I get contracts that are signed by, you know, the poor person passed away, but a contract that's signed by the estate of Joe Smith is not a signature. Joe's daughter's name as executor is a signature, but DocuSign just doesn't work well with any of that.
It's user error, garbage in, garbage out.
Correct.
Maybe last question is short sales. What's going on with short sales? I know you've done some short sale business out there.
The problem with a short sale is that there is absolutely no science to it. There's no way to know after you've worked on it for months whether or not the bank is going to accept it or not. I tried to buy a short sale out of the last short sale issue when Florida went bust, and I went up $25,000 3 times, and a year and a half later the bank said no. 2.5 years later they foreclosed. They sold it for $150,000 less than I'd offered. Now, part of the reason is that, and it's not necessarily as dumb as it sounds, is that if the mortgage is as FHA, or if the mortgage is VA, or if the mortgage is State of New York Mortgage Agency, Sunny Mae, or if there's private mortgage insurance, PMI, and the bank loses their rear ends, they can go to somebody and make a claim and try and collect the rest of the money. So obviously VA, FHA, all that stuff, we pay for the fact that those mistakes take place. But those are part of the reason that banks are willing to take such a shellacking, is they think they're going to get it back from somebody else.
Any last questions? Anybody? I got one. Interest rates are up. You seeing anybody doing assumables right now?
No,
Just checking.
haven't seen any. I want to talk a little bit about tying into zoning. Certificates of occupancy. On a two-family house, if the certificate of occupancy is issued, and it's issued for 5 years, people think that when they're buying the house in year 3 or year 4, that they are getting a transferable certificate of occupancy, and that the city is not going to come to them and tell them that they're in violation. In fact, even though the certificate of occupancy says right on it that it doesn't expire until 2027, if it is more than 2 years old, you cannot use it for the transfer of a house, and the city is going to come to you and make you get a new C of O. So it's just something that people just don't really understand. Only applies to two families.
Only applies to two families.
Two families are above or just
No, two families.
That is the dumbest thing on earth.
Dumbest thing. Yeah, no common sense to it. Everything else, it's whatever the C of O says, that's when it expires.
Update the codes too, or?
You have to update, after the 2 years, you have to, even though it says that it's good for 5 years, if it's two plus a day, you've got to get a new inspection, you've got to have all the work done.
You're still grandfathered.
Hey, Steve, what about
Then it would have been a brand new one, because that's good for 5 years.
Hold on, Colleen, what'd you say?
What about multifamily houses that are vacant for more than 6 months in the city?
The,
9 months.
I always, for like I said, the first thing I do is go and get a list of violations, because in the first violation I look for is whether or not the zoning has changed, because the house has been empty. A 4-family is changed into a 2-family, or a 2-family is changed into a 1-family, and that would be right in the violations list that the city sends me when I get your contract.
Oh, very important. Yeah, I thought I was buying a 5-family one time, and it was vacant for more than 9 months, and the city told me it was a 3-family. And I was like, what?
I had somebody buy a house out of an FHA foreclosure years ago, and it was a 6-family, and you know he just bid on it, and FHA doesn't guarantee anything. It was a 2-family.
Yeah.
So
What's the
it,
motivation for them to change them back when they're trying to push for more housing?
no, it's just the opposite. They want 1-families
They
and
pull
2-families.
back, but-
They don't.
But they need more housing.
You're absolutely correct. It makes no sense, but they want less apartments in every building in the city.
They feel that the integrity is stronger when somebody's in a single
upside
family
down.
house, they're not as transient.
I think that's true. It's more likely to be owner occupied if it's a single family. People move a lot less, and I think that's really behind it.
Steve, on that, I've fought it before. We won, but it has to be minimum 2,300 square feet. And you have to bring in an architect, you have to measure it, you have to be able to show that it will be a burden to be able to deconvert it back to a single.
When
We've actually won, but I'm not telling people about this.
Yeah, we gotta go in front of the zoning board of appeals and all that stuff, and it's like a huge,
It's a pain in the neck.
yeah,
And this happens mostly when they've been empty for an amount of time?
9 months.
9 months.
yeah, most of the time.
Well,
When I started practicing, if you could find someone that would testify that before 1956, when they passed the code, they knew that the house was a 4-family, even though the city says it's a 1-family, that was good enough to make it a non-conforming use. But you're typically not going to find someone that lived in the house in 1953 and is still alive to do that. But in the 80s, you could do that.
I had that same issue, and I went down to the city directories in the library,
Same thing.
and if there are different last names, 2, 3, 4 last names with the same address, I could prove that they were 2
Exact same idea. Yeah, yeah.
Steve, you have I saw in your notes there. I was sneaking a peek. You have the word of estoppels on there. Do you want to close your presentation with estoppels?
I would love to. People think I am. I try to be a real pain in the ass about estoppels. Estoppel certificate is a document that is signed by the buyer when you're buying an income property, and the buyer says, the seller has a $500 security deposit, my rent is $500, and I've paid my rent to date.
You mean the tenant is saying that, not the buyer?
Tenant is saying that. Because sellers lie. My clients tell me, we're doing a closing on, say, May 15th. My client tells me, I don't want to adjust the rent as paid. I didn't get it. I say, well, do you really want me to tell the buyer that you're sticking them with a guy that doesn't pay the rent and you won't trust him for the 15 days when he's going to have to collect the rent from him from now on? And some clients will say, I'm not going to adjust the rent as paid. And then other people take my advice and we adjust the rent as paid and go chase it afterwards.
Yeah.
But an estoppel certificate guarantees that when you didn't get a certificate of, or you didn't get a security deposit credit at the closing, that the buyer agrees that there wasn't a security deposit. So the new buyer is not going to, at some point, get sued by the tenant for a security deposit that they never received. That's really what it is all about.
I don't have a question, but just a point is that Steve is my attorney, but if you ever run into a situation, we had one, where you're buying out of state, or I put a loan out of state, and, you know, they're using the attorney for that state, well, I would recommend that you talk to your attorney, in this case, like Steve, and have him come in to the deal as a consulting attorney. We had one, and we substantially wrote the mortgage note on the property, just because they haven't used it.
No, and I agree. If you're buying out of state, you need to have a lawyer in the state where you're buying the storage facility. I have a very, very difficult time explaining to my good friend Scott Spear that I can't close a storage facility in Louisiana and that we really need to get a lawyer down there that knows what they're doing. And I stand by that. Happy to read the contract, happy to give my advice. Twice I've closed large industrial transactions in other states, multi-million-dollar transactions, and on both times, one was in Texas and another one was in Ohio, I hired lawyers in those two states to work with me. And they collected their very large fees because they knew they were never going to see my client again. And when the deal was done, and I had to go back to them and ask for something, they didn't know me. So you just have to get somebody, and you got to be comfortable with the lawyer. If you're in another state, make some phone calls, find some other guy that does storage units in Louisiana.
All right. We're done. Steve.
Out of here.